Thanks for coming back, dude. I was hoping that you'd be a frequent flyer, so I'm stoked you're here again.
Yeah.
I don't remember what we dove into, but these are I have to hard stop us at 5, so we'll barely get into it, but that's fine. I'm just going to drag you back if you don't mind.
Okay.
So, I'm in this season of wrestling with what I don't know what you call it. I think something along the lines of mysticism, elevated conscious, spirituality, kind of. Do you have a term for it? What would you?
Well, I need to know a little bit more about what you're wrestling with.
I would define it as confirming. It's the whole journey that we've been on. You know, Joseph Campbell's Secret of Myth combined with elevated consciousness. I think the version of Jesus that doesn't need to be true to be believed and or followed. That whole journey. I think it's elevated spirituality is what I would call it. I don't know if you even have. Do you have nomenclature for it?
I don't know that I have a single term. I mean, I think exploring mystery. I think elevated consciousness is a good one. I would also say, suggest enhanced awareness, a sensitivity to the magnitude of the universe and its energy, really beyond our comprehension, but not beyond our experience.
I love that. Beyond, yeah. So, and we came. I think you're one of the first episodes. But so this whole, I want to talk about a little bit of that, and then the inherent problem with it for certain people. So, who the audience is to me that I want to go to is the people that either left the church because it just didn't work for them, right? That they're like, whatever this is, I don't want anything of it. This doesn't make sense to me. There might be a God, but I can't find him here. Or those that are like, you know, I think the atheist is super intriguing to me. Somebody that's like unwilling to believe in anything that's untrue. Who this really isn't for, but I have to wrestle with is like the people that have come to find really good peace of mind in their current faith tradition, right? Like, so all the people that are in my traditional Christian circles are like, think that I'm way out to the left. So I just wanted to talk through the concept of objective reality and then how you assume I have really good friends, people that I love that are in the traditional Christian church that find this exploration threatening, or wrong or errant or flawed or dangerous, whatever that may be. I know we've spoke about it before. I'm hoping that we could talk about objective reality as well. What enables those of us that are curious to be so curious, absent, truth. And I really wanted to get to like, how do we measure for wellness, like in a human? I don't think we'll get there today. So with that, my question would be like, so I have found a version of Jesus where like, basically everything in the Old Testament and the New Testament, all of it comes alive and makes a whole bunch of sense. And it sounds something like, it doesn't have to be true to be good. It doesn't have to be like, the message is probably greater than our truth will let us understand. So I don't know if you'd want to change that at all, or you would agree that with that sentence.
Well, I would make a distinction between what traditionally most people think of as true versus truth. Truth sometimes, in my experience, becomes confused with an objective factual reality. And my experience is that none of the wisdom traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, speak on the level of objective reality as a means of conveying as best they can in the limited fashion of words their experience with wisdom and mystery. So most all of it is by metaphor and subjective descriptions of experiences. And so when somebody says, usually what you hear in the context of the Christian tradition is, do you believe this? Believe what? Well, do you believe that Jesus was the Son of God? Well, I usually say, what do you mean by believe? I mean, is it simply a phonetic ordering of words and letters that says, I believe in this, or does my life reflect the belief in the person that I read about in the Bible? And for most people, Kevin, that usually truncates that conversation because they've been trained to think about belief as an objective formula and an utterance of words or syllables in a certain order to represent belief. I don't really think my appreciation of reading that story is about formulaic, objective ordering of words or syllables. It's about behavioral changes based upon an awareness beyond what their previous consciousness was.
Well, then that gets into, I think one of the first things that those within the confines of the traditionalist, the institutional beliefs would say, well, isn't there an objective reality? There can only be one truth, right? And that would be something that I get, and I would answer with something along, and I'm mostly curious of your answer, but my answer would be there may or may not be an objective truth, but whether or not it exists, it's our experience of that objective truth is our subjective journey, right? So that therefore, if my subjective journey is different than yours, our objective truths inherently are different. Our experience of those are different. So then somebody would say, well, then there is no objective truth in that situation because it's all subjective. I don't know. Where do you go with that? Like or do you just not go there?
No, I really try to avoid some type of proof text. Proof text has become signals to me primarily of somebody beginning to embrace curiosity at a level that creates some discomfort. And so they resort typically to sort of a formulaic an attempt to contain something that's really not containable in objective reality. Because I think of truth with a capital T as a dynamic living process that continues to expand the more that humans engage at a level of awareness and consciousness that the vast majority of the population doesn't embrace. And that in no way is intended to be a judgment. I have been there and I will be there again. But I think part of the difference for me is a little bit what you've heard me talk about. I feel a little bit like Dorothy and her three friends in the story of the Wizard of Oz, who go down this yellow brick road in pursuit of something that they've defined as the wizard. And they've got this wizard built up to be this super sort of phenomenal answer source. And they come to find out that the wizard really is no different than them, that the answer never was beyond them. The answer always was within them. And so the things that most of us search for, at least in my experience, we tend to think that there's something lacking and that thing or that experience that's lacking is beyond us. I think what I've begun to embrace is there's nothing lacking in me. If I would spend more time listening and becoming more conscious and aware, there is plenty within me to rise up and expose and show to me the wondrousness of this mystery, whether you call that God, Yahweh, Jesus, the Holy Spirit in our tradition, whatever you call that, the name is not relevant to me. The experience is what is most critical to me. So I think that first off, I try to be very conscious of people's level of consciousness and comfort. And I try my best to not suggest things that create a level of discomfort where people retreat as opposed to stay on the front lines of that discomfort and let curiosity begin to germinate where they want to take a further step into discomfort. And that doesn't always happen, but my goal is never to prove somebody into a position, whether I agree with it or not. It's to walk with them into the land of discomfort, which is the threshold of curiosity.
And then I know you told us on the last time you were here, but you went to seminary, and what was it that and I think we've talked. It's like it didn't work anymore. Like there had to be something more. What was that? What was that moment for you, or series of moments, or what brought you to I don't want to say reject the typical teaching, but expand into maybe what our Creator might have had beyond the traditionally held dogma, if you will.
Yeah, seminary was sort of my peek behind the curtain, like Dorothy and her three friends when they discover the wizard is not what they projected, but in fact more like them than different. What dawned on me in seminary was that similar to other vocational curriculums like law or medicine or business or engineering, any of those that we typically run across in the university system, they're training people to be in that profession. So if you go to school to be a civil engineer, the goal is to make you a civil engineer at the end of that process. It's not to create an awareness such that you say, I learned a lot, but I'm not sure that civil engineering is what I want to do. So when you go to seminary, the assumption by and large is you're going to be a pastor and we're going to train you to be a pastor. And that is certainly a legitimate and worthy goal. I have no objection to that. I was the one who thought that you went to seminary to explore and learn curiously about the rest of the story. My experience was not that. It was to train people to become pastors, not to invite them into the exploration of mystery and how to embrace their discomfort and to talk about that discomfort such that others would become more curious and therefore more awake and aware.
And then you're at seminary and you're recognizing that this is a school designed to teach pastors to teach kind of a curriculum, more or less. Is that, yeah?
Yeah, it really is.
And then,
yeah.
and you say,
now I'll say this about the professors. The professors were of the highest academic quality, and a true academic is far less concerned with an objective reality, especially in the courses that you cover in seminary. But the first time it really became real to me of this tension between the goal of becoming pastor versus the path of exploring mystery was my Old Testament professor suggested something about Hagar and how she too was included in God's family. And of course, that's not what we spend a lot of time talking about in the traditional church. And a couple of the students asked me afterwards, man, what did you think about that? I thought it was really kind of novel. I had never considered that, but my God certainly, I think, would be big enough to care for another human. I mean, Hagar didn't really pick her circumstances. I mean, she was kind of in a bad place being the handmaiden of Sarah and kind of being told what to do. So I said, why would God be mad at her? And anyway, it didn't resonate with the two people who asked me the question, and they ended up filing a petition with the dean to suggest that this professor was not teaching theology in the way that was most familiar to him, which he was not, because his goal is to invite people into that process of discovery as opposed to simply spit out answers.
So you go to seminary, and your intent behind seminary was to advance your curiosity of God and higher, and you found or did you go there intending to, you weren't going there to become a priest or a pastor, correct?
I really didn't know when I went. I was at a place in my professional career where I didn't have a whole lot of satisfaction with what I was doing day to day. So I knew that I was going to make a change. I had been involved in teaching and facilitating classes within our church for a number of years. And the more that I was involved in those groups, the more interested I became in my own journey. And so I decided I would like to go and sort of accelerate this learning. And I had another goal in mind. I really thought that it feels very different for somebody who's in the Monday through Saturday work world trenches every day to show up in front of a pastor who's on the pulpit, and I had some very, very qualified, competent, capable, effective pastors. But I always wondered, man, do you really know what it's like out there? You're talking a whole lot about stuff that makes sense to me in terms of coping mechanisms and how to navigate life, but you've never been shot at. Now, they've been shot at, so to speak, in their own profession, but the business world is a lot more dangerous jungle in a lot of ways than the pastorate world. So I thought, if it appeals to me as somebody who's married, has 5 children, and is showing up every day, and yet still trying to live this Christian experience, would there be a place in the formal church to speak to other people in the congregation who were similarly situated? And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I really need to be more educated and qualified. In hindsight, I now realize I was never going to be invited into that circle of fellowship within the pastorate because I really was never going to meet all the qualifications. I mean, never mind the fact that I had a perspective that was probably invaluable in terms of what most of the laity was experiencing. At the end of the day, I'm not a pastor, and pastors have answers.
And are you suggesting that was not a club for you because of your expensive curiosity? Because that would get you not excommunicated, but you wouldn't fit in their box. That's why.
Well, I was never going to receive an invitation.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it wasn't even, oh gosh, I got invited and I didn't fit. I was never going to receive an invitation. So, and I don't want you or your listeners to take any of this to say that the institutional church was or is not of significant importance and of immense value to me. I would never trade that experience. And I'm not somebody who thinks that the institutional church is done, and I don't have an axe to grind with the institutional church. But given where I am in my experience, I decided that staying in the institutional church, simply because that's the way that we've always done it, was not the best use of my sense of calling to invite other people to this sort of liminal space of discomfort so that curiosity could be to seep in. And so every Wednesday night, 22 of us gather at my office, and you were a part of that experience one time. And it's all voluntary. Some of these people still attend the institutional church, not most of them, and they don't have access to grind. It simply was a buffet that was not feeding them.
Makes good sense. I don't know if we're gonna. It makes good sense to me. I don't know. It's something I struggle to communicate. Is like why it's insufficient to feed us, but it is totally wholly for me insufficient to feed us. But maybe this unlocks it. So you've mentioned the getting people outside of their typical threshold of discomfort into curiosity. Can you walk that? Just when you say that, make it a little bit. Speak to a contractor. Speak to not.
Yeah. Well, let's take an example that, again, largely because of the Western orientation that we all live under, and also the educational system where we are rewarded for answers versus not rewarded, but encouraged to have questions beyond answers. So people usually feel more secure when they have an answer, but security, because of an answer, can be a very limiting life experience. So for instance, in our group right now, we pick a theme each week and we kind of walk through that theme, always using the biblical narrative. But it's based upon a series of questions that sort of invite people to question, how did you come to believe that particular aspect of our tradition? And have you revisited that enough that you might have discovered something else. So, for instance, next week we're going to be speaking about the kingdom experience. And the Gospels certainly have references to the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. And if most people are asked that, or at least most traditional Christians, they will say that has reference to some type of ethereal place that one goes after respiration based upon the affirmation that Jesus is the Son of God and came to offer his life for the satisfaction of our sins. And that's fine. I don't know the answer to that. I really don't get into whether that's an answer. But what I ask people is, could it possibly have additional meaning? And they're like, well, what else could the meaning be? I said, well, one, if you read the text, there's almost no reference whatsoever to those descriptions by Jesus of the kingdom is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is now. There's no reference to a deferred experience. It's an invitation to begin that experience now. It doesn't mean that there's not also a deferred experience. But what is one to do with their life from essentially the time they're born until they die at 80, if all we're doing is trying to work our way into some type of position where we can call ourselves members of the deferred gratification society, i.e. heaven dwellers? And again, without ever trying to criticize anybody, but simply asking them. And I say, look, think of me as an alien from a foreign country, from a foreign world, and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate life. And I like how you navigate life. And so when we have that conversation, you say, the Judeo-Christian tradition and its principles are important to me. I say, oh, well, that sounds really good. Tell me about it. Well, if you believe in Jesus, then when you die, you'll go to heaven. Now, if you're like most thinking people, you'll say, okay, I know we're all going to die, but what about this interim period called my life now? Well, that's going to be a hard thing because they usually come up with some story about the devil or the enemy in the world who's trying to rob us of our salvation. Like there's this cosmic fight going on. And again, all external. Almost none of it is about, did you pause long enough to think? Did you read anything else? Did you ponder that you might not have all the answers? And if you go back and read the biblical narratives, you find that these people are not answer people. These are people who have honored pause long enough to hear something deeper about their own awareness as opposed to some fairy tale. And again, very cautiously, because as I said, I never want anybody to abandon what their belief system is. But once I begin to invite them into that questioning process, what they quickly find out is somebody else told them that story. They've never really thought about it themselves. And so I say, well, if it's worth navigating your life by that story, it might be worth reading that story again.
Yeah, people are going to listen to this and think that I'm just spitting that I just am a disciple, because I started on the heaven journey just because my whole thing is like discourse blending, like finding a way for people to get along, and this whole like who gets into heaven, who is not. I thought it'd be an interesting dialogue to have amongst Christians, and it's turned into this whole big thing. And I can't read I cannot find it in the text, to your point. And I don't think you schooled me in this. And if you did, I didn't notice you were. But like, I can't find it in the text. You're going to stop respirating and then go to heaven. I can't find you live now. Like it's the kingdom, like you said, kingdom of heaven is at hand. But I just want to marry that back to like, what is it? I don't think we tied the knot on this threshold of discomfort that enables curiosity. I think that was an example of where you're taking your group, but like how, so I would compare the yous and the me's of the world. And I think they talk about universal wisdom. Maybe Rohr talks about it. You see the mystics, and there's all these alignments for me anyway. And I assume you would agree. Like I can find the wisdom of Buddha to align with the wisdom of Jesus, to align with a lot of, I mean, the Old Testament and the New Testament now reconcile for me, because I found this like elevated form of thinking, is what I'd like to say, not to diminish the old form by any means, but I'm just curious. You would say that in a lot of circles, and people would say, "What are you doing?" And they would go to the text to affirm what they already know to be true. There is no reasoning with that. I've actually done it like 20 to 25 times in John. Talks about heaven now. 5, it's somewhat suggested that it's later, and then 5, it's confusing. And it's like, it's an overwhelming amount of objective evidence. Not that we want to get into that, because it's a lived experience, but what enables a guy like you and a guy like me to both of us that have found faith in Jesus Christ and a comfort and a lived experience with Jesus and access to his spirit and all that, to wander down a road of curiosity, and others to be, just take this and just don't take me there. Don't go there. Like, I just am wondering, what do you think is at the center, or maybe it's a series of things for those of us that are curious, expansive, imaginative, and then many more that are dismissive. What is the difference there? All very good, well-intended humans, smart people. What's driving that? You got to know. You have all the answers.
And I really don't. The line that I was thinking about when you said something earlier about finding it in Buddhism, Hinduism, wisdom, and all that, there's a quote in the Vedas that really brings home what I've become very comfortable with and really excited about. Because once I become comfortable that this is not an end game where I can neatly wrap everything up, but it is an ever unfolding exploration, I get really excited about that. But the quote is, "Truth is one, the sages speak of it by many names." I think you can put wisdom in there for truth. Doesn't the same wisdom that comes through in Judaism and Christianity and Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism, all of those traditions and other ones have treat others like you want to be treated, the golden rule, and they have other similarities like that. So the fact that there are differences in there, and if somebody becomes so defensive of their own tradition, it's sort of an internal flag to me, which I would never suggest to anybody, as, man, where in Jesus's life was he about exclusivity? I mean, he hung out with anybody that would listen. He conversed with anybody who would ask him a question. He had dinner with anybody. Where did we get the idea that Christianity had the one single answer, and that if we ever thought differently, that some bolt of lightning from whatever you call your deity would strike you down because you had a thought that was like, hey, man, I wonder if other people who've never heard of this could pattern their lives in similar ways and be about the same path that I am. And again, if you sort of separate the institutional church from the mystical experience, it's not that the institutional church couldn't embrace that, but you can't have sort of a free-form, porous, experiential boundary around an institutional church and build membership. You have to tell people, this is what it means to be a member of this church or this tradition. And the mystics say, we're never going to tell you what it means to be a part of it. We're going to give you the guidelines of what mystics have said throughout history. But what we really want to know is, what will your contribution be to the mosaic of mystery for other humans? And I really think we're continuing to add to that. I don't think that the institutional church has the same focus. I just think it's a different focus.
And you said the Vedas, that quote was from the Vedas for those of the audience that's like me. What is that?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
I think it is an ancient Hindu scripture. I'm not exactly sure, but it's Vedas. And the Vedas, I believe, are a collection of those early writings. Again, not out of the Christian tradition, but the wisdom of that phrase. I mean, Jesus echoes that when his disciples come back and basically say, hey, somebody out there who's doing what we're doing doesn't say they're a part of us. And Jesus says, quit worrying about what club they're in. Just watch how they're living, and that's the same, to me, echo of what the Veda statement is about truth has many names.
And so if somebody's listening and they're mildly curious, but they're mostly dismissive, and they say, but Alan, there's got to be only one truth. Jesus came, died on the cross to cover us for our sins. Like, that has to be true. Otherwise, the Bible's all made up.
I just don't find that book to be a factual narrative in terms of being able to prove any of that. I mean, first off, I would ask that person, all right, well, let's assume that's the case. What Bible did Jesus order his life by?
and
they're going to say, well, Jesus is the first Christian. I said, no, he's not. He's a Jew. And the only Bible he had was the Hebrew Bible. And the Hebrew Bible doesn't say anything about what you just relayed to me.
And then you're going to, and I'm like picking my avatars of who we're talking to. And then you're going to get a Catholic from the back, and they're going to go, well, what about the apostolic? This one is the apostolic succession. Are you familiar with that at all?
Is that the passing down of the stories through the apostles and that type of deal?
Yeah, I need him here to,
Well, no, I would just say, and again, I have a lot of respect for the tradition of Catholicism. I mean, it's taught us a lot. In fact, all of the Protestants come out of that tradition. But I would simply say, okay, the apostolic tradition. I said, by the way, was Constantine an emperor from the east or the west? And he was an Eastern. Yeah. He was an Eastern emperor, and so really, the Eastern Orthodox Church is probably a closer glimpse of what the early institutional church was, until the power of Rome imperializes religion to the point where it becomes a force, not in a bad way, but also dangerous in the sense of, if you're going to be a Roman citizen, you're going to be Christian, and you're going to be Christian this way. And then I would ask them, okay, well, pick your most sacred doctrine. And usually a Catholic will say original sin, or they'll say the virgin birth. I'll say, okay, let's just take original sin. And you said something earlier about, well, if that's not true, then the Bible's not to be counted on. Again, I would say, if that's going to be the source text by which we sort of filter through what we find to be consistent with our belief system, where does it talk about original sin? And they can't answer that because they probably haven't studied it enough to know that original sin as a theological doctrine comes about in the 4th century through Augustine. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not. It is an interpretation of that person's understanding of what the biblical narrative is.
So original sin is not the apple?
No, their concept of original sin is that humans are born from the first couple, Adam and Eve. And as a result of that, they're born with this sin. That could be, but the story itself is not told like that. That's in Genesis 2. Genesis 1 is where God is doing all of the creating. It is good, it is good, it is good. And then he gets to the one piece of creation, the crown jewel of creation, humankind, the only thing created in God's image and likeness. And he says, it is very good. Now, either you existentially arrive as an image of God, and good not because of what you do or fail to do, but because of who created you, or you arrive with this blemish. And so to arrive with the blemish of Adam and Eve, which I think is the basis for original sin, you kind of have to ignore what God did in Genesis 1.
I want to make sure we stay away from the lands of rights and wrongs, right? I think everybody's on a journey, and seek and you will find, and I think it's a beautiful thing. So I'm with you. I don't condemn anybody for their beliefs. I find myself perpetually having to defend mine as they evolve outside of the church, which I think is unfortunate, but I understand it. For those that are like listening to this and they're like, these guys are off the rocker. What is there anything at stake? Is there anything at stake? Like to me, like for me, that I've always had this. I have this deep evangelistic calling. Like if I have something great, I want everybody to share it. And it's like, 13 years of reading the Bible, leading Bible studies, and staying inside of the church. I didn't maybe go in the building every Sunday like they tell us, but generally I stayed within the boxes. I did the SAT scores. I filled in the boxes right. I didn't color outside the lines. And now I'm coloring outside the lines, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought it was alive, but now it's really alive, right? And it's like just amazing, the ability to like interact and like, I don't know, this spiritual connectivity, the recognition of like freeing oneself from all the burdens of like true sins, not breaking the rules, like not being afraid to be legalistic and like, but like realizing the sin is that like my own desires, like having 16 desires when I can be more singularly focused with my innate divine nature, right? And so like, anyway, I have this like, I want to bring everybody with me. I know you don't share that, and it's probably a sin that I do have it, or it's part of my divine nature that it's an obligation, whatever. But like in your eyes, for somebody listening, and that's just like, that's fodder, that's heresy, that's blasphemy. These guys are going like, what's at stake for them, if anything? Yeah, to miss this journey, to choose to opt out of expansive thought.
I mean, I can really only say what I feel like my life was like before versus what it's like now. And I share with you the enthusiasm, the excitement about that. And so there's really no going back. Once you sort of cross the Red Sea and you're in the wilderness, yeah, you're scared. Yeah, it's uncertain. Yeah, it's kind of a moment by moment thing, but that's kind of how life is portrayed in the Bible anyway. And don't store yourself up treasures for future and all of those phrases. So what I would say to people is, look, I'm going to honor whatever you tell me. I am not here to persuade you or this, but you asked the question. And so in honoring your question, I'm going to give you my best response. And you're not going to offend me if you, like what you were saying there, maybe some of the people you've talked to have said, oh, it's blasphemy, it's heretics and all. Then I'd say, all right, let's say that that's the case and all. What was Jesus accused of? And as far as breaking the rules, how did Jesus do on rule breaking? What's his biggest conflict with the religious right? His biggest conflict is don't eat on the Sabbath, don't heal on the Sabbath, don't make a guy who's blind see on the Sabbath. It's like, okay, so we think that's all well and good, but it was still a rule that he broke because he had a rule that was expansive, that was all encompassing. Last night I gave them this example because I think it is helpful, at least within my group, to bring it into sort of a contextual level. And last night's word was alignment. And I said, I used alignment because we spent a lot of time in the church talking about sin or missing the mark or the things that we should avoid. But alignment is a proactive choice that says the narrative by which I want my choices to be filtered through are love something larger than yourself that our tradition calls God, and love other humans or your neighbor like you want to be loved. And that's easy to say, but that is Jesus' summation of the law and the prophets, which is his tradition. And so the example I gave them last night is we live in a world that honors division because division brings some level of comfort in terms of our certainty that we're right. So for example, you're going down the interstate and you see a car that's broken down and there's a lady outside trying to change a flat. You pull over and she's got 4 whining kids in the car. Do you stop and say, by the way, you look like you're of Latin descent. Are you here legally or are you undocumented? And you say, well, of course we don't want people coming to this country who don't obey the rules. And I'm like, that's not the question. Ask yourself what Jesus would do. And so then you go to the parable of the Good Samaritan, and Jesus says, don't worry about that the Samaritan is a half-breed Jew that came out of the 10 tribes that was traded and conquered by Assyria, and that they worship God on a different mountain. Watch what the Samaritan does. He stops and he picks up that beaten soul on the side of the road, because that's what the Samaritan would want somebody to do for him. And he carries him back to town, and he pays for him to get cleaned up and to have a meal and to stay. And Jesus says, I don't care whether he's a priest, Levite, documented, or whatever. There's another human in need, and you stand on the brink of the kingdom experience by loving your neighbor just like you'd want to be loved. That's what they would miss.
Yeah, amen. We're going to run out of time because I want to dig into that. I think fundamentally that's why that was my like irreconcilable truth, is like the least loving thing we can do is isolate anybody from this truth, right? Is to draw these lines. It just doesn't, it's incongruent. Like the love and inclusion of Jesus, but believe as I believe or you're going to hell. There's no, I just can't see anything less loving to say than that. But then, then the critique is, well, if you don't bring them to the love of Jesus, then they're going to hell when they die. And it's like the whole thing comes back to heaven. But what I've been accused of, I don't want to say accused of, somebody said, well, what do you believe? So I just want to make sure when we close this out, like, what does Alan Jordan believe? Like, if you had to boil down, like, make it simple and succinct, like, what does your fun, and I know it's all embedded in this whole conversation, and I have a very clear sight picture, but for somebody that hears this, we're suggesting Jesus isn't the only way, the only truth, the only light. Like, what are the foundations by which you navigate life? What is your belief?
And I think you know this and all. When I say navigate life, of course, I fumble and stumble. I've learned to let go in fumbles and stumbles other than to let them be moments that help me realign. So what I would say is, look, I believe that Jesus represents the best example of a person that I've studied who, based upon his life and the stories that were told in the Gospels, is a way for me to align my life to claim the full human experience as who and how I was created in God's image. And that is boiled down simply to love something larger than yourself. If I ever get a God that I can fully define, I need a new God. God will never be definable. God can be experienced. God can be explored. God can be embraced. But as soon as I can tell everybody, God is like this, God did this, and that's the end of the discussion, I got too small a God. This is for Alan. Other people may have a different opinion, and that's okay. And the second thing, and most fundamental, is in every thought, word, deed, interaction, when I engage with a human, the filter should pop up. Am I about to say something or do something that engages this person in the way that I want to be treated if I'm on their side? And that's a very difficult standard to consistently apply, but I absolutely believe it. And what Jesus says is, look, it's going to be a lonely road and it's going to be hard to do. But I came that you would have life, but life at a level you can't even imagine. It's called abundant life.
Amen. I love it. Well, thank you for coming. I'm going to wrap us because I really would like to, for next time, whenever you get time, I'd love to explore like Jesus as the Son of Man and Jesus as the Son of God versus our own internal divinity and how you come to believe all that, which is dangerous. And then I think we should expound upon this, like a God small enough for us to understand isn't big enough to be worth following. Something I've said for a long, long time, but like it's so embedded in the word faith is belief in something that you can't see. So it's just so weird to me that we start with, well, is it true? It's like you can't have a faith if it is true. If it's proven as true, it's like a fool's errand. So I want to get into that, and then I really want to sit down with you, talk like I think a lot of what this centers around is our inability to think in a nuanced way. We do simple thinking, and it's like particularly something I've heard you preach on, and I think I got from you at an early age, is like you don't believe in retirement. Like, there's two things that don't matter: is your income statement or your wealth statement and your dead weight, right? None of those matter. And so what would it?
Well, they're not.
Yeah, that's how you say it. Yeah. But what I'm curious about is this concept of wellness, right? True wellness. And like, And I know that it's going to look different for other people, but what I've come to find is like I can talk to a human and know how well they are. Like I can see the old striver in me in some people, and I can see the old disconnected, and then I can see the abundance. When I find somebody that's just charging after life, and maybe they're not super driven, but they're just content with themselves and the world around them and how they situate themselves. It's just like if we were to give people a different number to strive to, if someday we were to test for this and the only thing we cared about was our wellness score, and I know that's not the right way to do this, but I'm just curious if we were to do that, to simplify it for people that are like, yeah, like it's I guess it's really hard to get off the dead race. I think the dead race is, the typical race. It's hard to get off the dead race if there's not something else, right? So to give people persons like something to measure their life against, like what is it that we should be seeking, right? And that's like, and I know I'm not trying to define something that's so expensive and crazy. I mean, I know it falls beyond definition, but it's I don't know. I just think that if you measure it, if there's a number assigned to it, if there's something you can see, it can become a race that can be run. If it remains completely wide open, it's very hard for people to channel anything but pursuit of money. And that's a dead end road. We know that's a dead end road. As soon as you get some, you want more. And as soon as you get more, you want more. And then when you have more, you realize you're empty. And I'd love to talk about that with you.
Sure. It's not a magnanimous event for me to respond to my 90-year-old dad in his time of need. It's simply a rubric that says, one day I may be 90, whether it's my son or it's Kevin or anybody else. Would I want whoever I rely upon and love to show up, and how would I want them to show up? And they're not easy choices, because I wanted to honor the time that you had asked me to be a part of this. But that really is how life is. It doesn't unfold like a formula. I mean, this popped up at 2:45 this afternoon. So it's like, okay, here's the narrow gate that leads to the road that's hard, but it leads to life.
Well, I appreciate you choosing your pops over me. We're all good over here. And we're all good over here. And my only ask is that I can keep bothering you to come on, man, because I think
you're not bothering me. Yeah. So I'll be glad to.
Thanks for being here.